Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. Today's guest is a passionate security professional with over 2 decades of experience, primarily in data security. He's currently a principal security architect at Guidepoint Security. A big welcome to Lance Fischer.
Hey, thanks, Ward. Appreciate the invite.
Hey, I'm really excited to have you with me today. So, Lance, let's jump right in. Are you ready?
I am. Thank you.
All right. In your professional opinion, what is the biggest data security challenge organizations are facing?
Great question. So, I think when I'm having this discussion, I have it quite often, I've ended up boiling it down to the difference between data governance versus data stewardship. And for a definition of that, data governance is dealing with the policies, the processes, procedures, whereas data stewardship is only concerned about the procedure. So data stewards are not responsible for building policies. Their job is just to interpret them and then have the tools. So data governance is the rules of the game. Data stewardship ensures those rules are applied consistently and effectively.
I love that. So, just thinking back to a few roles, actually my last role that I had in the enterprise, I would sometimes use the analogy, and it's funny because I was using this analogy without thinking about your definitions here. I would often talk about, the court system and the laws and the police officer. And what I would tell folks a lot of times, being a data security leader is, hey, folks, I'm the police officer, right? I'm doing things, I'm putting in the controls to enforce the law, but I'm not writing the law, right? Now, I'd go back to, based on what you said, the data governance folks to figure out, like, what laws am I actually enacting here?
Yeah, I like that analogy quite a bit. And I think that the challenge there is what you see is that you've got folks that are very dedicated and want to enforce that law that are not getting the guidance that they should. So, you have problems there. And I think with data security specifically, then it gets messy. And as I've listened to the previous episodes, we kind of all have our different way of saying the same thing, but they have controls. So we look at the governance should guide what we're doing, but you already have something in place. So how do we manage that is a huge challenge that I see. And then kind of on top of that is that there's lots of different controls. It's kind of a common discussion for us in anything cybersecurity. What do we do with all these controls? So we have lots of discussions around tools rationalization and consolidation and that sort of a thing. And so in this process of me talking to people and understanding, like, how do we communicate this, I really boil it down to, like, where do we start? And for me, that is visibility. So a lot of times the folks I'm talking to, if you define, what is your sensitive data? Just take it kind of asking questions of, like, can they define that? And it's usually going to be high level. We don't want credit cards to leave or something like that. But a lot of times that's not what the focus is, especially when you get into anything that's IP or anything specifically to an industry. So, and you'll find that the kind of process of going about this is to interview vendors and have them proof of value and show you kind of and it's always the same thing. It's the scare report of here's where your data is. And that's kind of the proof positive to say we had no idea that this exposure, and that kind of starts that journey, I think, which is then interesting because it is this balance of the business should provide us guidance for what we should control, but they don't really necessarily know what guidance to give us or what exists there. So then kind of, I jokingly say, then all of this starts and then everybody buys DLP. And the common part of that is that, what are you protecting? What data what policies are that protecting? And then everything that the platform play for vendors, and there's kind of a lot of noise there too that hits the technical folks that maybe don't have that ability to communicate at the governance level or help them explain that. And so what you find is that lots of tools that aren't doing much, that and or they've made an investment in the past that now they're realizing, why are we renewing this? This is a waste of money. We've never done anything with it. I mean, and then kind of along that, I always say is that Microsoft's always a part of this conversation. Microsoft is very relevant and has a very, very strong story, but it kind of fractures off when we start looking at like what is unique to your organization, the people, the firmographics, et cetera. So
Yeah, I've always found that difficult too, and definitely agree with what you're saying about visibility. One of my former mentors, he always used the phrase, "The data will set us free." Mainly being, last organization he never brought in to solve an issue, which was data security. But what does that really mean, right? To what we're talking about, what does data security actually mean? And part of that, or the first part of that, was let's get visibility into what's going on, right? What data do we have? Where is it going? Bring all of that around. Then it comes to the data will set you free, right? We start seeing all of these things, and you can start to have, at least I did, real conversations with folks in the business to say, hey, you told me you deal with, you said PCI, so I'll use PCI. Hey, you've got PCI data, right? Payment card, credit card information. Survey says, based on the visibility, you also have these other things that your business units deal with. Did you know? I'm going to assume you've probably dealt with very similar conversations with customers.
and it'll kind of stop there at times, I think, because once they get awareness of the magnitude, then I think there's a bit of panic almost at times of where do we go? And part of my job in talking to all of our clients is I take a very pragmatic look at what we're doing. So, because there's this notion almost of, well, just go spend money and everything will be okay. But it does align to, how many people do we have? That's a big thing when I talk about stewardship and we're talking about programmatic building. You have to ensure that you have the people to manage the tools. They're not magical. And that's kind of part of the problem. That's a broader cybersecurity challenge, in my opinion, that we take on initiatives without really understanding total investment it's going to take. So you've got very hardworking people that are doing their best, but they're wearing 3, 4, 5 hats. And when you get into these more programmatic type of like data or identity, et cetera, that needs to have dedicated resources that focus on this, because even once you find that data and the data sets you free, now you have to rationalize that. And is that's where it's supposed to be? And how did it get there? And who are the data owners? That entire kind of process takes quite a bit of time and needs to be discussed kind of going into that engagement. No.
Yeah. So, kind of take a step back. So the challenge is visibility. And as we know, right, the enterprises can be very complex, right? If you just think about your basic enterprise, that's kind of, the mom and pop brick and mortar, it's relatively easy, air quotes, to um, wrap your arms around. Here is my real estate. Here are my data stores, and now I can start to insert, the visibility tools or techniques to figure out what's there. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for folks like myself and yourself that are in data security, it's gotten more complex, right? Yeah, you need to have more expertise across all these various things. So when you start an engagement, or even just a conversation, right, with a customer or prospect, and you're trying to conquer visibility. I'll leave it just at that. Visibility. Where do you start with that? Because I'm going to assume, like an elephant, you're not eating the whole thing. You're coming in and trying to take bites.
Yeah, that's kind of how we advise them, is that's where I see failure. They want to kind of ingest everything and solve everything. So a lot of it was interesting is the more I have these conversations, like from in the hundreds of different organizations I've spoken to, one of the things is consistent is that at some point, if they have chosen a tool and they've done their due diligence and governance is in place and everything is, exactly the way we want it to. So at some point you have to kind of scope that out. So the question, how much data? I don't know the answer to that. That's very common for me to hear. I had one customer we were working with that, had budgeted, did the due diligence, everything worked out, and he said he wasn't going to move forward. I asked him, it's always interesting to me, why is that? And he said, and he had quoted for 1 petabyte. He said, it's within my budget, aligns, but he said, what if I have 2, 10, 20 petabytes? I bankrupt my program before I've even started. So it's an interesting, like little pieces like that you realize that the problem kind of goes beyond, what compliance are we worried about? It's not even understanding the magnitude of the challenge that's facing them. So it is kind of tied all together. So I see it as a very like reciprocal, that the stewardship part, you're providing that data, you're providing the data to set them free. Then what are you going to do with that? Now that we've given that to you, do we have policies in place? So, and then folks will just go out and buy a tool, or they're getting courted by vendor of the day. And honestly, it's a noisy environment. One of the things I say, Ward, is I'm like, there should be more dialogues in our business and less monologues where someone comes and tells you what your problem is. I'm like, that's very frustrating to me when I hear that. Let's try to figure out what their challenges are. And a lot of times it's political and, interesting little lack of business unit collaboration and a lot of the things your other guests have said as well. But so it really comes down to that I think that if you focus on visibility, focus on a subset of that I think that it's kind of, crawl before you run type of a deal. And give feedback to the business, allow them to help guide you, enable them to kind of provide the guidance you need. But that's the approach that at least that I'm taking. And it's very interesting. These engagements are very interesting to me, and the feedback that I get for clients and what's holding them up and what's challenged them in the past.
And that's an issue. It's an interesting issue you were just talking about with that one client you're working with, where they wanted to start, right? They had the budget, which amazing, right? Not everybody has that. They did their due diligence. You said they were going for 1 petabyte, but it sounds like they stutter stepped and said, "Oh shoot, I'm not going to move forward because what if?" And just thinking back, I've had a lot of the same. No, I didn't stutter step. I moved forward, but it's very disconcerting, maybe the right word, that we have folks that are wanting to do the right thing. They're getting their ducks in a row and kind of pausing right at that, right at the goal line before they score the touchdown for actually doing something. So, if you're able to share, like, what happened there? Were you able to lead them to water and get them to drink to do something, or did that just kind of go by the wayside?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that I don't like taking no for an answer. Earlier on in my IT career, I worked with a old kind of curmudgeonly guy, and I said, "We can't do Charlie. We can't do that." He said, "Lance, we can put a man on the moon. We can do anything." So I kind of work with that. That it's like, is that your answer? Just to let them. So what's interesting is that what might be tertiary to this discussion is related, but you start looking at when I talk about data loss prevention, and you get to that kind of level of maturity. I talk about it in terms of threat vector. So source to destination, where can that data flow? And again, do you have visibility? So it's almost like they have to stop and step back and start understanding where collect getting data from the controls they already have in place. Can they start getting visibility even just on the magnitude of data to ensure that they're aligning like to just the budgetary piece of that? And then I think I was thinking as well that kind of the other challenge is that then who owns the tools in the organization and that cooperation, and they all have a different opinion because my tool of choice that I'm using, they say they now have data loss prevention, or they just acquired a DSPM vendor, et cetera, et cetera. And then kind of on top of that, again, is Microsoft and where their value is. But all of these take specialties. And so when I'm talking to customers, regardless of what the tool is, I need them to understand that level of effort. It kind of goes back to the stewardship piece, but they, if they swap tool A for tool B, you haven't solved a problem. You still have the same underlining challenge that you're looking for. But that would be my answer, is that I try to figure out, given the data points that they have, is there a way for us to collect that data to kind of put at least a rough order of magnitude to the scope? I think we do a horrible job of that in the security industry. It's just everybody kind of goes down the path, and it's like, imagine going on a road trip and you kind of have an idea where you're going to go, but you don't know where you're going to stay, you don't know how much money it's going to cost, etc. We should give more focus on that. So that's a big thing in how I try to approach this as well. Give them rough orders of magnitude of people, time, dollars. So at least when they're going into it, they're a little more aware and not hit off guard when they struggle with the things that you and I know that they're going to struggle with. So.
Yeah, yeah, and I think so. Certainly we were just talking a little bit about starting an initiative, right? And it sounds like your example, they got a little trigger shy because of the potential costs. I think about some of the programs that I've stood up where it's okay, great. I've got a program, I got some tooling, I certainly have some people, but oh my goodness, I have all this, and you mentioned it before, I have this data to now sift through, right? For the data to set me free to do the next step, I have to digest this data. And hopefully I've got the correct visibility and the correct telemetry coming in to make it meaningful. So, when you have those organizations that they're racking up those gold stars. So gold star, you've got a program, you got a budget. Gold star, maybe you've got some visibility. Gold star, you're starting to get some of the data together. How do you typically advise them to kind of move forward? Because I think there's a lot of stuff right there that many organizations aren't thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this, but I see this path of data security maturity very similar to what identity was like 7, 8, 9 years ago. And that is that you kind of know the processes that are in place, or you kind of know what the end goal is. But like I look at, building an identity program. What is a new user? What should they have access to? Just defining a profile of a user, all of the applications. There's a lot of documentation to that before you even do anything control wise. I see that as being the same thing. Like you're going to have to start collecting that. Like where does accounting normally put their data? What are their processes? And then et cetera, to all of those different data points. And then where I offer our guidance as Guidepoint Security is that, we're not magical. There's nobody here that's magical. But if we can help you traverse those waters, because a lot of times it's political. Well, why is this guy from security coming asking me where I put my data? And that, it's that kind of ties back into the governance piece, though. You need to know, they need to know that you've got the support and they're backing you on these efforts. But so it's kind of that, we try to meet them. I try to meet them where they are in that journey. It's why I use the term pragmatic as well, because it's going to vary wildly. One of my favorite CISOs, when I hadn't spoke to him in a while, he moved locations and I kind of talked to him about data, and he's been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I said, what is his guidance? What is he? And his answer was, he said, well, I started with legal. And with legal, I said, here's the problem we're going to face. And I got their buy-in. Step two, to all of the developers, and said, what data do we collect and where do you put it? Now, Ward, that was kind of an interesting. I'm going, yeah, normally we go engage with a data discovery classification tool and we go try to scan, and then you kind of walk through this process of like, why did the data, but we should do more of that too. Like if somebody knows where the data is, why don't we go to them? Now that's a subset, probably mostly unstructured, but doesn't have to be. But yeah, I mean, what a great way to look at that as well. So, but it really depends on the overall maturity. I mean, a lot of times that I get into the weeds of tools, which I really do not care to do, but that's the world, that's the view that they have. So you're kind of almost elevating those data stewards to the point of having them understand the need for governance, that they're going to fail. And if you put a control in place that blocks legitimate flow, the story I always tell is I said, here's what's going to happen. Could or may not have happened to me, but you block some legitimate data flow and the CEO's, assistant calls and says, we weren't able to get that contract out because I tell him, I said, let me explain to you how difficult it's going to be for you to get, chance to turn that on. So it's really just understanding kind of the entire environment, and that'll vary depending on who we're talking to. So
It's interesting as I was listening to you talk just now, I was reflecting back on your solution to the problem, which was visibility. And as you were talking through that scenario, talking to developers and talking to others, I realized, and again, I have this problem. I came up through the ranks as a technologist. So when I hear something, I generally refer back to tools, technologies, whatever. But I think, based on what you just said, what we're talking about here is not visibility just from put in a DLP tool, put in a DSPM, put in this thing and get visibility. We're also talking about business visibility, having those conversations between real humans to get a sense for what's going on.
yep. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a human aspect of that, and that's one of the things too that I think is part of like communicating the time needed. So I will simplistically say that you engage with a DSPM vendor, we snap our fingers. Day one, you have a full data map of everything there. I said I would argue your work is just going to begin because what that's going to uncover, there's no way I've yet to see any client we've spoken to that has said, "Oh yeah, I knew that." They don't. I mean, you're going to uncover all of those pieces, and then, you know, uh, what is that going to take? And again, it's kind of that. It's this back and forth between the cooperation that should happen between the stewardship and the governance, and back and forth. When I speak of it, I have a kind of a little graph. It's like circular. It's like scan, analyze, remediate, update policy, scan. So it's going to kind of be a continuous process for a period of time until you kind of get your feet underneath you. And the folks that I enjoy talking to the most are the ones where they say, we anticipate this will be a 3-year journey. And I'm like, all right, I think we're going to do okay here. As opposed to the folks that are like, we're hoping to have this done by Q4 2025 here. I'm like, you're out of alignment, so it's a challenge. Yeah.
So again, going back to visibility, and now that I've come, I mean, you were already saying it, but I realized what you were saying would define visibility. So if we think about data security visibility, both at the data level, right? The bytes, the ones and zeros, but also the business level, right? The conversations, the subsidiaries, the various teams, developers, right? Security folks love going and talking to them. How do you guide your clients to start that? Because in my opinion, that's probably a couple different tracks of work, right? To go off and do them. You could probably do them in parallel, which is great. But on top of that, you may also have different skill sets that go into that, right? You're going to have probably your typical security engineer, which is really good at putting in tool to get the visibility, but might not be so good at going and have the conversation. So how do you get people to start that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I think it depends on who we're speaking to, but I do think it's two tracks potentially. There is that, from kind of a advisory perspective, we can engage and help kind of have that conversation simultaneously while some of these other things are going on, because that's what I seem to think. Like as I present, I talk to my clients and I kind of paint, I think, a very good picture of what this looks like, kind of holistically high level. I always say, now, all of that being said, you're going to start with DLP because everybody starts with DLP. Everybody wants to start with DLP. And I think the fear there is that they're so concerned that things are leaving right now. We have to do something. But so depending on where they are, understanding those skill sets, like because it's interesting you said like they're security professionals, but it's like saying that I'm a firewall admin. That doesn't mean I know how to program, or that, or I'm an endpoint, I manage the endpoint. That doesn't mean you're going to know data. And I think that gets thrown to them in the same way that I think that, like, if somebody's a network engineer, they're not, our brains are different on the security side on how we see things. So, yeah, so I think that, um, it really depends on who we're speaking to. I think we're having a lot more success on the kind of advisory aspect of it. And I think that, things like AI are really driving awareness that there is a potential risk there. Specifically for a lot of the clientele I speak to, NYDFS has been a big one kind of pushing this forward. I think it's sad that that's what it's taking, but it makes me kind of, joyful that at least we're making progress. And I find that as we engage, these engagements are typically 18 months from kind of time of speaking to them, where I will kind of paint a picture, and then you'll come back in a couple months, and then it's all of the noise that happens of, like, well, what if we use tool A, or we're being pressured to use tool B, or that sort of a thing. And, you got to kind of keep pulling it back to about, the guidance in the program, and what are you trying to do, what's important to the business. And they have to guide, I would say that as well, they have to guide us to that. Yeah, it's a challenge, it's a very big challenge. All the other podcasts you've done, I was very anxiously listening to see if they had a good answer for that. I don't think we do a very good job of that, and it's a challenge because it's, one of my financial customers were talking, and he just the entire program got stalled. And I was speaking to him one day, and I said, "Well, how's it going? You making any traction?" And he said, "Well," he had a discussion with the CIO, and the CIO said, "Well, all of our data is public. Why do I care? And what am I going to do with that? Like, if the business can't kind of comprehend the magnitude." And then sadly, because we are kind of a pure play cybersecurity, we help them understand that, helping them get out of the breach, and then they see the impact of that. That it's not your data specifically, but what could that mean from a ransomware perspective? There's a lot of tendrils to this in my mind and how I see this. And then, and one of the things that I think is important, that it's like we don't do, on the security side, definitely not on the data side, but it is kind of what we're discussing here. Like, if I was as a network admin back in the day, I would build a network map so I could get a visualization of what this looks like. We need to be doing more things like that. I try to do that. I do a lot of visualizations when I present, because I'm finding a ton of value that it lands the plane. Because it's kind of an ethereal concept until you can kind of show them, this is what this looks like. And they say, "Oh, I see. We do this, then this, then this, then this." So providing that guidance, and then kind of working through it with them on whatever their process will be. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a challenge. I wish it was easier. It's not. It's definitely not. You know?
Yeah, you're bringing me back a little bit. I mean, I remember some of my, call it network map, call it data flow, call it whatever. Network topology is kind of a term I throw around quite a bit too. I think back about 15 years, it was relatively easy, right? Here's my firewall, here's my application database, here's how data's flowing. Then fast forward, I don't know, 5 years, about 10 years ago, then APIs were starting to get really big. So starting to show that mapping. And that was always fun because, not all APIs were, well categorized, right, within a CMDB within the organization. So going back to your idea of visibility, right? How do I get visibility into that? And then finally, you said it before. I wasn't gonna say it, but you said the good old 2-letter acronym AI. Right now we got AI out there. A lot of organizations trying to implement that or adopt it, and that's a whole different issue from a visibility perspective. How are people using it and all that? So, with that as the backdrop, how do you see AI and APIs and those things really affecting the idea of visibility, right? Visibility into what they are, but also visibility into the data within those.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my day to day job here, I speak about way more things than just data. So you get involved in many conversations and um, DevSecOps and what does that look like? You talk about the API piece, but then you start getting these interesting little tertiary things about, do you have a tool that can show us what's in our GitHub, and concerns about keys being stored there, or is there any privileged data stored there for it? It's very interesting how it kind of tangents out. But what is interesting, I think, is just an overall awareness. So one of my peers does a lot of our conversations on AI and what does that look like. So at first it was, we got to shut it off. We don't know what to do. We're fearful. And then you look at it, it's kind of this, it's a typical maturity cycle too. Well, we want to securely enable it. And then, there are now vendors that offer browser plugins for any privileged data that's uploaded via browser, they will tokenize it. So my first question was, how do you know it's sensitive data? It's like, it's a very cyclical discussion that there are some kind of core things in my mind that you need to do. You need to start with understanding where that data is, but it is very kind of like reaching into different parts. One of the things we're seeing quite a bit from a maturity level are organizations that are now utilizing data, which is fantastic to me because security usually being a cost center, but we have data, we have models built out to track fraud or anything else that's important to the business. I always find those stories very, very interesting. But now they're saying, well, we want to offload some of the security data or network performance data or et cetera, so that if we see a fraud incident, then how do we take action on that? Or how do we further increase the fidelity of that data to see, was there something else that caused this? So then fantastic, and then some of that is from, trying to offload the cost of their SIMs, et cetera, is a challenge. But now what was not really part of this, now we're looking at data covering that. And now you've got this big, beautiful data lake that's got way more data than you ever would have anticipated. So then there's a governance aspect about the AI piece that goes beyond of just somebody using Chat GPT. And I'm of the mindset that the concern about AI is data, because to me, what do I care what somebody does? If they look up, where do I get the best price on Tide laundry detergent? That's not an impact to the business. We don't care. But, you start looking at all of the different vendors, and anybody can go to RSA, go to Black Hat. You'll see all of the different vendors then that have that answer. And it just adds to the noise. It adds to the overall kind of challenge that I think that folks are facing, because they're being bombarded from all different directions on all of these different ways that everyone's the magic wand. So, yeah.
I want to go back to the challenge you said, and it was data governance versus data stewardship, and you painted the picture of imagery you use, which is the cyclical, right? You've got visibility, you're doing this, you're doing that, and I've used similar imagery where more from a tooling and technical perspective, where I'm going to first get visibility. I'm going to use the visibility to tune. I'm going to use that to maybe block, and then it's going to kind of go round and round. So for organizations that are starting to build out a governance, a stewardship, whatever lingo they want to use,
Mhm.
um, what what recommendations do you have for them on kind of defining that relationship, maybe some of the policies around it to really get value to be able to push their data security program forward?
Yeah, so I think it's a cooperation between the two, and they have to start communicating. And I see that it's I have this silly phrase that I would say that it's like, visibility kind of drives awareness, awareness drives conversations, conversations can drive action. So I think that it is symbiotic, that they have to work together. I advise, just as we do in security, like, get as many pieces involved as you can. If it's HR, and have them understand and have their voice heard, have legal's voice heard. We engage with that from a broader security perspective at times, but it really is just trying to build that cooperation. I'm seeing more of that from my clients that I support. that there is better cooperation, that they understand that the kind of the legacy silo that, this is my toy, not your toy, go away. It has to stop. So, yeah, any way that we could help that way is really what the focus is. Differs.
How do you see, because I've struggled with this, and I've tried to, in some of the programs I've built, do like you're describing, right? Have that relationship. Where I've struggled is capturing the input and the output. So, and what I mean by that is, if I'm bringing something to a governance committee or legal HR, whatever, hey folks, I've got this thing. Here's my data. Maybe here's my proposal on what we do next. Whoever I'm talking to that comes back and says, hey, Ward, we understand what you're doing. We want to do X, right? So I had an input, I had an output, and maybe I haven't got a further output because now maybe I'm defining a new policy in the DLP tool or whatever. How how have you seen folks be successful to actually capture those data points from almost like an audit perspective of, on today's date, I did this thing, that thing, met with these people? Because I'm sure you've dealt with this. That's super important from a external audit perspective, right? I've got these process procedures from a kind of an ongoing maturation perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think that it's important to say with all of this that I don't have an easy answer to any of this. I don't think any of us do. It's a challenge kind of in general. So um, it is very interesting to me kind of where we are because I've been doing this for 30 years now and where we are from a security perspective. And that the path we've gone on that a lot of times I talk about that, I started this industry before PCI was even, founded. So it's that, so you kind of see that those things push it. That's really sadly where I think that some of that comes from. It's fear. It's fear from the business that either they have had a near miss on some sort of an incident and it raises awareness. I think there's becoming kind of a maturity from the say industry perspective. So CISO to CISO, you can start or CIO to CIO, start kind of communicating, and I like that the best because then you're not kind of pushing that rock uphill. But it really is a slow process for me anyway because I wish we could be doing things better. But one question I had one time that I asked had somebody who was new kind of to security asked me the very generic question, Ward, how much should my security budget be? What's your answer, Ward? It's typically, if you go Google, it's 1% of IT budget or something to that. But the best answer I had from a CISO was he said, I want it to be a percentage of overall revenue. I think he said 1% of revenue. He said, in that way that as the business grows, my budget grows. So, yeah, it's kind of that's kind of part of the challenge too, is that a lot of times where does data sit in the organization? Is it a governance thing? Is it a security thing? And then one of my clients that we had a big engagement with that bought a security tool that kind of paused, ended up pushing it and it wasn't going to go through. And I asked them why, and they said because it's not sexy. So that's one challenge we have too, is that if you're looking at allocation of budgets, the big players, the shiny objects are the ones that always end up winning out. So
Totally, totally. The budget one's always an interesting one. So I've heard the percentage of, IT operating budget. I haven't heard the revenue one. I love that, right? Because as revenue goes up, you kind of assume the business is getting bigger. So, it does make sense that the security budget should go up as well. I don't have a good answer back to you on what I've used, but I'll add in the additional complexity. You've got the security budget, right? You got that bag of money, but then you've got percentages of that bag of money that go to the various facets or pillars of security, right? Like, oh, this is going to go into my IAM group. This is going to go in my SecOps. This is going to go data security. And I'll tell you, doing the data security program a couple times now, my percentage of that total bag was often pretty slim until I was able to go back to your point, visibility, and show, hey, all these other things we're doing is great, but we've got a real data security problem. So we can do those other things, but if we don't shore up this thing, it's for naught, right? Like it doesn't matter if we go do the new shiny EDR deployment if we don't know what the heck our data is and have the appropriate controls around it.
Yep.
So Lance, I mean, it's pretty clear you are very passionate about this space, and in your own admission, I wasn't going to say it, but your own admission, you said you've been doing this for about 30 years. So tell me in the audience about that. Like, what was your journey? What got you into technology, and what keeps you going, waking up every day and dealing with data security?
Yeah. So I started back in 96 working for a small kind of a retail organization in the Midwest and did a little bit of everything through that time. And I think a lot of us that have been around, you've done a little bit of everything and started, it was supposed to be a Unix admin originally is all it was. And it was just file transfers, about as boring as you can get, but was able to kind of take that process and expedite it quite a bit, which then made everyone happy because they got their reports quicker, et cetera. And then from there, I've always had this kind of what next, the old long time ago, you had time to lean, you had time to clean. I don't like having time to lean. I go and find things out. Eventually, kind of get into server admin and everybody does the help desk, that sort of a thing. You work your way up. Eventually, a manager. I have people working for me. And one of the things I would tell them, I'm like, if you have time, go poke around in the nerd knobs in there. I mean, if you any piece of technology you have has got something that you don't know what it does, go learn that. It may not be relevant, but you're going to be a better engineer. So, and you kind of you kind of grow and learn and grow and learn, and then eventually went and did like Cisco consulting, which I think probably some of us have done, the networking route to the voice and wireless, and really the security was the one that always drew me. And I was having a discussion with someone today that, the red team versus blue team, what is more appealing to you? I think red team is fascinating, but I was always drawn to blue team because it's like, great, you broke it. I agree. Everything's failable. We can get into anything. Tell me how to fix it without, breaking the company, breaking processes. So, then I've worked for a couple of different vendors, did that kind of side, gives me a different viewpoint of the world, very different viewpoint of the world. But I came back to this because I think that I appreciate the opportunity that hopefully that I can affect change. That's an important thing to me, that I think there has to be a better way. And if I give up that hope, I might as well just quit. And at one point, I think I got frustrated and I told my buddy that I'm like, man, I'm just going to go back and disappear and sit behind a keyboard, as I said, like in the basement behind a keyboard, we're in the dark. And he said, yeah, but if you do that, then you have no ability to affect change. I mean, so I feel for the people we speak to, that I know that good intentions, smart people, hardworking people that are beating their head against the wall. So I have this incredible passion for trying to figure out some way, if it's data security, if it's any of these things that I have to talk about on a day-to-day basis, can I break it down to its bare essentials so that it's understood, that can help you move your initiative forward, whatever that is. And I'm passionate about that quite a bit. And I think it's important and I wish more people would do that. I think we have too much of everybody's kind of out for their own agenda, not what's best. And so, yeah, but yeah, so I've loved it. I've loved being part of it. Security is just fascinating. And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So it's a constant ongoing process.
That's quite the journey. So, and I've asked this of a couple of folks. I'm going to ask it of you too. So, if you could go back to, maybe we won't go back to 96, but if you could go back in time a little bit to a younger self and give yourself some advice, um, number one, would you, I suppose? And then I guess the add-on to that is like, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you learn that's a question that's easy to answer when you're looking back on your life, but at the time you don't have that clarity of vision. But it's interesting because if you look at your journey, I see where everything led to another, so you kind of see how it built upon each other. But I look at that, I wish I would have started earlier. I wish I would have kind of got into this career earlier because, I was 26 years old, 27. And then, you get to be 30 and you've got guys that are 19 or 20. You're like, how are you that smart? That I'm older than you, that kind of a thing. So that's probably my only regret. I like the journey, and my advice to anybody who's looking to get into this business is that you got to have a passion. You have to be curious. You have to want to learn. And I also tell them that it's okay to change. Like, I mean, if you look at, like, I was all about Microsoft and I wanted to be an MSE more than anything in the world. And that changes. And then that becomes something else. But yeah, I think I just wish I would have started earlier. And I admire the people who are as smart as they are. I always feel like I could be smarter. So, but yeah.
Anything you want to focused on?
Man, I think probably one of my weaknesses is just any incident response. Like, that's one, like, honestly, and to your question too, I'm like, if hey, if you won the lottery, what would you do? I'd go work somewhere that was really an awesome place and just have them teach me everything IR. Reverse engineering things I think are fascinating. I think we are too trusting of software and, everything that's around. And I would love to be able to have that ability to actually break that apart and do the analysis needed to see, like, what's exactly traversing that. But yeah, especially in the world we live in now. But yeah, that's it. I mean, it's interesting. I think I'm kind of driven too, though, that I want to know how to do everything. So I kind of but I've also found in my career too, that every time you did that, then you owned it. So you got to kind of be careful with that. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I definitely had that a few times in my career where I would advise, my mentees, like, be careful what you sign up for because you may end up owning it. And it was never to, get them to shy away, but it's like, hey, if you've got a full plate, like, just dabble a little bit. Don't become the man because you might literally become the man at that point.
I was lucky too, though, that every place I worked, I was able to kind of touch everything. And that's one thing that I would say, because I've definitely had folks that I've known or are in our industry, and you find out that it's like they do one thing and that's all they do. And I'm like, I would go crazy if I had to do that. So it's such a dynamic industry that we're in, and it's like it's constantly learning. So
Totally agree. Well, Lance, if folks want to find you, connect with you, sync up with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
yeah, you can hit me up on LinkedIn, I'm sure. And it's Fischer, Fischer, on LinkedIn. I think I might be one of the few. I don't know anybody else named Lance. So, but yeah, and I could definitely get a hold of you and talk to you from my Guidepoint account if needed to be. But yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Lance, big thank you for joining me today.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. And big thank you to the audience. So if you learned something today, if you laughed, if you found good insight, please continue to follow us. Please tell someone else about the podcast. So again, Lance, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Ward.
This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centro. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte-scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centro.io. Catch you next time.